The next episode of Children of Heroes brought us to a picturesque town of Gerald's Cross, about an hour's drive from central London, where we visited Mr. Martin Josten, son of Lieutenant Josef Josten.
Thank you for participating in our project Children of Heroes. I think your father Josef was a Czech soldier during the Second World War.
Yes.
Could you tell us more about him? And if I'm not mistaken, you just wrote a book about him, have you?
That's right, yes. I've got a book that I've just published, and I can tell you more about that. So briefly, the story is that he took up journalism in the 1930s and actually was working briefly for Lidové noviny, alongside someone who's much better known. Karel Čapek was one of the editors. And my father worked in the same office. But when the Nazis invaded in 1939, early 1939 I think, my father joined a kind of resistance movement and was planning the escape of young Czechs from Prague to go to the west and to fight. But he was found out, and so he had to get out quickly, and he had a long escape, one of those who went eastwards through Slovakia, Hungary, Yugoslavia, Middle East. Eventually went to France. He was helping in the evacuation of the provisional Czech government from the south of France, and was taken to Britain, where he then joined other Czech soldiers and trained to fight under British command.
And this is your father?
Yes.
How old was he?
1944, he was 31 years old. He was born in 1913. He was actually born as a citizen of Austria-Hungary.
Do you know who is on this picture?
If it's not written there, that is probably my father standing on the left and one of his comrades. I'll have to look at it more closely, but I think that's him. He seems to come in various different uniforms.
Yeah, Dunkirk.
He was always interested in the journalistic and the broadcasting side. So while he was training, he was also publishing a Czech army newspaper, and he was assisting the BBC in providing broadcasts which were related to the Czech situation. He became a sports reporter, but gradually his interests moved towards politics. He actually adopted a pseudonym, a pen name. His original name was Josef Stein, and he decided that he wanted to write under a more anonymous name, so he combined them to form Josten, which is, as you know, not a typically Czech name at all. It's more...
No, it could be, but not typical Czech name. Yeah.
And then after a time, I think probably just before the war broke out, he adopted that as his own name. He was more than just a journalist, he was a campaigner. He returned to Prague in 1947, having married my mother, who was English, but then they were only there for 10 months when the coup d'etat occurred. He was working in the foreign ministry. He was press attaché to Jan Masaryk.
Oh, it's interesting.
And so he had to escape again.
I see, yeah.
And after he came to Britain the second time, he set up a news agency to report on the kind of unofficial news from behind the Iron Curtain. So his achievement was, you could say, for nearly 40 years, he was reporting uncensored information and, in a sense, compiling an independent history of Czechoslovakia during the communist period. The medal was presented to my mother because my father had already died. And the reason for it is that as I mentioned, my father set up a news agency after coming here to report on what was happening behind the Iron Curtain. In his later years, his attention moved more towards injustices that were happening in Czechoslovakia. It's difficult to describe the exact process, but after 1968, public opinion here did change quite a lot. People became more aware of what was really happening in the Soviet Empire. So there was, if you like, less need to publish written material about the political scene. But my father felt more he wanted to support the individuals who were being targeted by the regime. And so he ran a number of campaigns using his political contacts to get dissidents released from prison. And one of those dissidents was a playwright called Václav Havel. And my father persuaded a British politician, Sir Bernard Brain, who was a senior member of the British Parliament, to make a nuisance of himself by repeated requests to the Czech embassy and to the Czech government for information about what had happened to Havel. And this went on for a couple of years at least. And then what happened was that Havel was released because he was ill, and he was sent to a kind of high security hospital or something like that. And I don't think he was ever put back in prison after that. And we think that the regime had got so fed up with these British politicians calling them, writing and making a nuisance of themselves, they just decided to find an easy way out to release Havel from prison and push him away somewhere where nobody knows what's going on. And so I can't really claim that my father got him out, but he certainly played a part in having him released. And Havel recognised that, and so he wanted to show his gratitude. So my mother and I went to the Hradčany in Prague in 1995, and with a number of other people who were also decorated and received the medal. Yes. So I wonder if you know who Alexander Kerensky was. He was the leader of the Menshevik party in Russia, who actually led the February 1917 revolution. And when they were defeated by the Bolsheviks later that year, he went into exile in America. But in 1967, he came to celebrate the 50th anniversary of that February Revolution in Britain, and while he was here my father interviewed him. I was actually a teenager at the time, but I got to meet him, and then he gave us a copy of his memoirs, and as you can see he signed it very nicely for us. So that's quite a nice memento of history, really. Milada Polishenska, who works for the Anglo-American University in Prague, was given some kind of research grant to go and study exiled literature in the University of Lincoln, Nebraska, which is well known for its as a centre of exile studies from Central Europe. And she was really interested in how the work of exiles like my father influenced the diplomatic relations between Great Britain and Czechoslovakia. So she wrote the book as if you like, an exemplar of the influence of certain individuals on the diplomatic scene.
How did this Czech heritage impact your life, and have you tried learning Czech language?
I was sent to a Czech language class on Saturday mornings in the Czech National House when I was 6 years old. But I'm afraid I wasn't a very good student. In my job, I've been sent to other parts of the world, and so I've had to learn other languages as well.
You were an engineer?
Yes, that's right.
Working for British Petroleum?
That's correct, yes. Yeah.
And covering over 40 countries.
Yes.
I imagine you traveled a lot?
Yes.
Did you like your job?
Very much, yes. Yeah. Yes, it was a great career, and I had the opportunity to visit all kinds of interesting places, from the Arctic to the desert to the jungle, everything.
You are currently very active in charity work.
Yes.
Can you tell us more about which kind of charity?
Well, I actually work for a charity called Food for the Hungry, which is involved in community development in poorer parts of the world. So we have received some British government grants, and I've been responsible for managing some of those projects, or at least managing is too big a word. I've been the link between the donors, the British government, and the team who are already doing the work on the ground.
You are also involved in the Ukraine refugee working group in your local church?
Yes, because the local churches here have been very keen to do what they can to help the
How do you
refugees.
help concretely?
Well, some families in our church are actually receiving guests, so the Ukrainians are coming to live with them. But we recognise that those families need some support. They can't do everything on their own, so they need help with getting necessary household goods and clothes and so on, with going through the paperwork of getting their guests sorted out with documentation, helping the children to start school and so on. So there's quite a lot of background support that's needed.
Last but not least, you are also the neighborhood watch coordinator for your street. How does it work? Because we don't know this concept in the Czech Republic.
Okay, so generally speaking, there is a decrease in interest in community activities. I think it's with globalization, with electronic communications and various other factors. There is a tendency for communities to break down into individual family or household units. We are trying to mitigate that trend by creating street communities, and there's a national network called Neighborhood Watch. So I'm simply the street representative, which means I know everyone in the street, I know all their names, and I send them information about security issues or about local events, and occasionally we organise street parties to just help people to get to know each other and to support each other when it's necessary.